Hi, this is Dave Bricker, and I'd like to introduce you to my favorite graphic design program, Fireworks. It's an Adobe product that's kind of flown under the radar, but it does some wonderful things. I'm going to center this in the video here so that you can see my whole screen. And let me just show you how this works. I would quit design if this program went away. I'm such a tremendous endorser and user of it. I use it for everything. To look briefly at the toolbar, you'll recognize the tools. Where it says bitmap, you're going to see all of your Photoshop tools, your lasso tool, your clone tool, your blur tool and smudge tool and dodge and burn. All of this stuff is stuff that you should be familiar with. Over underneath that, you've got your pen tool, and a couple of other interesting ones, your line tool and your various vector tools, some of which are kind of different from Illustrator, and there's a couple of interesting ones here. The web tools we're going to get into later. These are what allow you to slice out various pieces of your graphic. And let me put the property inspector on screen. Whatever you select, whether it's a tool here, for example, when I click the text tool, I get the options for that tool, and that's there under Properties, Windows, Properties, pretty much like every other Adobe program. But the other thing is in the tool, in the panel, let me move this here, there are some fun things, and I'm going to work pretty quickly just so that we can demonstrate. I'm going to start off with the rectangle tool, and I have the option here. I just created a white rectangle, right? I can change its color. Let me get something more visible. But the other thing I can do here is I can go to my styles palette, and let's choose, for example, old paper styles. And I can, with that rectangle selected, I can choose a nice paper background, something that looks a little bit more organic, perhaps, than a standard vector rectangle that's kind of sterile. To go through some of these other tools, you've got your basic ellipse tool, your polygon, but you also have tools for things that really come in handy that would otherwise be a pain in the neck to draw. For example, here's an arrow tool. I'm going to go ahead and fill that arrow with a red color and no stroke. And what's great is I have these yellow handles. So if I want to make an arrow, I don't have to splice a triangle onto a rectangle. There's all sorts of ways to adjust this arrow. I've got my transfer modes here. I'm going to set this to multiply so it blends with the paper. Excuse me. Lots of things you can do here. Another thing that's great is this may be a vector. I'm going to go ahead here. I'm going to make this a vector. But if I want, let's get rid of that texture that's on that. I can add a texture to the vector. Just come down here. Now it's a solid vector, but it's very easy, for example, to feather the edge of the vector. Another thing I can do with that vector, for example, is I can use the reshape area tool, select that vector. Let me ungroup it because it's a shape. Select the vector, and now I can actually smear this thing around, and you see the points. It's still a vector. Lots of options there. Another thing that I love about this program is I collect textures, and I know a lot of people are very fond of typefaces that are distressed, and the problem with using a distressed typeface is if you get a word like lottery, and let's take a big horsey typeface like Arial Black and make this bigger. The problem with the distressed typeface is when I get a word that has repeating letters, like these two T's, they're going to have the exact same spatter pattern or ink pattern or distress pattern, whatever it is. Let me make this black and then deselect it. This is pretty standard stuff. What's great is I can use vectors as a mask. So in this case, I'm going to import from my image library. I have a folder full of paper textures. Let me get this on the screen. Bear with me for 1 second. And I have one of my favorite ones to use, which is this roller ink pattern. And I'm going to go ahead and scale this down because it's rather large. And let's go back to 100%. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a little darker. Adjust color, levels, which was off the screen. I apologize. Let's make that dark. And let's set that to multiply. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to position that. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to select that object. And I'm going to say edit, paste inside. Now I can set this back to multiply, and what happens is I get something that looks much more organic, much more inked, and the two T's are different, things like that. Another thing that I love using text is I can use my text tool. Here's some text. I'm going to go ahead and do a lot of things to that text. For one thing, I'm going to use my distortion tool. This is great if you want to put that text on a wall or a billboard. It's very easy to do. I think what I'm going to do is under my filters, let me hit return, which will finish this up. Under my filters, these are all non-destructive, and I'm going to move this to the top just so you can see. I'm going to do some eye candy stuff with this, which means I'm going to put a bevel on the text. I'm going to, let's make that a little smoother. I'm going to add a drop shadow to the text. I'm going to put a gradient fill, which I can select here. Let's use a linear gradient, and let's just pick some hideous colors since we're doing a demo and making eye candy. So here this is. Don't try this at home or on any kind of professional project, but it's ugly. But what we do see is we've got distorted text with a fill pattern, and yet I can still double-click this and highlight it and edit it. So that's very useful. You get a lot of cases where your text will have a pattern or a style applied to it. Another thing I could do is I could simply go to my styles and choose plastic styles, for example, and you can either make your own or choose, let's just grab that one or that one. So if you want to make quick buttons and things like that, there are some great gradients. The circular end of the gradient is a pivot. The square end is the part that you rotate. So I can go ahead and set that gradient up like that. Other things with Fireworks, let's take the ellipse tool, and in this case, you see it left the old style on it, but I'm going to go here, I'm going to choose a radial gradient, and I'm going to go from white in the center to, let's use our red, and then I'm going to simply drag that away, and I'm going to go to black. I suspect, yes, drag that one away. And now I'm going to make a little point there, come back, and set that little specular highlight up in the corner so I get a nice sort of billiard ball effect. And then I'm going to use the stroke tool to take that off. Now, what I can do here, oops, I just adjusted it. I'm going to option drag. Please let me option drag. Here we go. I had the background selected too. I think that's what happened. Yes. Okay. Select that. Drag this. Now I'm going to go back to a solid color. I'm going to go here. I'm going to add not a texture, but a little bit of feathering to that. I'm going to use my transform tool, Command T. I'm going to squash that down and send that to the back. And what I get is something, again, that's all vector graphics, but it doesn't look like vector graphics. Another fun thing to play with is brush strokes. I'm just going to put a line across the screen here. Let's make a nice, I'm tired of red, let's use a nice dark blue. And then what I'm going to use is oil, broad splatter, which won't look like much yet, but let me set my brush size. Here it is. And what I can get is some very organic kinds of brush strokes that do not look like vector strokes. Your standard, let me get rid of that. All of your standard vector tools and non-standard vector tools, there is a Pathfinder type. Oh, that's still got that stroke on it. Let's get rid of that. You see how easy this is to change and take a green rectangle and another green rectangle. I can select them both, and there's a path window that I can open up for this, which there it is down here, which has some very sophisticated path operations, some of which Illustrator does not have. If I want to combine them in one way or another, or edit the points, select points, align points, there's all sorts of vector editing tools here. What I'm going to do here is say modify combine paths union, and now I have my one shape, just like I would with the Pathfinder tool. This tool reads and writes Photoshop and Illustrator files. Mostly what I like about it is that even though it's possible to make horrendous eye candy, I'm getting results here that combine vectors and bitmaps. I don't have to go back and forth from one program to another. You may find that you love this program, you may find that you hate it, and that you really prefer to go back and forth between Photoshop and Illustrator. I see people fall squarely into both camps, but this is definitely worth exploring and learning. It's what we'll be using in my web classes, and I think you'll find that if you get used to it, the learning curve is not very steep on it, and we can come back and you can just you probably won't go back to the old way of doing it. If you do, that's fine. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and use the import tool. I'm just thinking, what can I bring in here? Projects. Let me just pull something in from a client project quickly. I should have had this prepared. This guy's got some great photos. Pictures, and I'm just going to choose whatever this is. I don't know if it's too big or too small or what. I'm going to go ahead. Yes, good. Nice whale picture here. So I have this image here, and I can do all of my usual Photoshop stuff with the clone tool and things like that. Got that. Let's close this path tool. But for example, if I want to simply adjust the levels, I've got the same tools as Photoshop, and maybe I'll make this a little darker. Maybe I want to pump the blue up a little bit on that picture. Any number of things that I can do. If I wanted to add some noise to it, that's a bit much, but you get the idea. And what's beautiful about this, again, these filters are non-destructive. They work just like adjustment layers. If I want to get rid of that add noise, I can either turn it off temporarily, or I can select it and remove it. My transfer modes are here. If I wanted to combine a bunch of filters into a style, these are the ones I've used. I can click new, make a new style. So you can store these things. It's really a lot of fun. The best way to learn Fireworks is to fool around with it and play with it. The last thing I'll show you is here in the panels palette. There are a whole lot of tools that maybe you never thought about, but they make some of these tasks really easy. There's a cog tool. How many cogs do you want? Here's the inner radius. I could take something like this and fill it with a brass texture. It could be very useful if you've ever had to make a crescent. Again, very simple tools for adjusting, how much arc, things like that. There is you'll laugh at this one, but the Valentine's Day quandary. If you've ever had to make a heart, you end up splicing circles and angles together. Here's the cleft, here's the breadth, the vertex of the arc. All of this stuff is adjustable, and of course here we have to go to our red again because it's the only valid choice. So if you want to do some of these tasks quickly, you can do it. You can always export these to Illustrator. Lots of neat tools in here, talking balloon, thinking balloon, and then we have down here at the bottom, let me see if I can make some room before I stop this video. There is a common library. And what's great here is I have, for example, Browser Chrome. Here's a Mac vertical scroll bar. I'm going to go ahead and put this on the side of my piece, and then I'm going to scale it. Let's see if I can. It's a little too tall. Let's just. So for making mock-ups, it doesn't seem to want it to change. There's a Mac vertical scroll bar. There's different styles of these things. Browser, cursors, um, Windows vertical scroll bar. Maybe that one will be a little bit more. But when you want to make a mock-up for a client, you can drop these things in and scale them, unless you're giving a demo, in which case the scaling won't work. All sorts of great things here. Audio, little icons, things that you can drop in. So if you want to show a client what the interface is going to look like, video, iPhone, cursors, the weight cursor, right? The resize cursor, all sorts of little things already done for you, buttons. It's all set up so that you can mock up websites and things like that. That's my very quick, very brief introduction to Fireworks. I know I've gone very quickly and rambled a little bit, but it's pretty easy to get into and learn. Experiment with it, explore, try doing some vector masking. And again, just to review that quickly, because it's one of my favorite techniques, I'm going to take this crescent, I'm going to put it on top of these whales. I'm going to cut the crescent, Command X. I'm going to select the whales, and I'm going to hit paste as mask. So if you want to make odd sized icons or odd shaped icons, you can do that. And then going back to the layers palette, you'll see I have a little lock over here. So I'm going to unlock this, and now I can actually move this behind just the way I want it, and then relock it. Lots of possibilities here, imported graphics, scanned graphics, things that you make. And what I love about it is most of this stuff does not look like you made it in Photoshop. It doesn't look like you made it in Illustrator. It has an organic feel that most software doesn't give you, and that's an important design element on the web. Okay, I'm really going to quit now. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in class.